Happy Friday. Glad to see you all on this day one of the White House executive order, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Those of you who are focused on compliance, privacy, AI, and so forth, leave the headlines alone. We'll talk about it. It's interesting. It's big news, but it doesn't mean anything to you tomorrow, or it doesn't mean anything to you over the holidays. It doesn't mean anything to you January 1st, but you know what does mean something to you January 1st. New obligations in multiple states. We'll start with Texas. No, we'll start with California. Because those are probably the most consequential. I know our audience and our core folks are super legal, geeky, governance, compliance folks. Many of you have been working on this for a long, long time already. And so maybe we'll flag something, but you're on top of it and you're here because you want to be part of this conversation. But some of you who are not our day-to-day, micro geeks might be like, what? Wait, I thought it doesn't start until where, when, what? Well, guess what? Some things you got to be doing. I was talking to Richie earlier this week, and Richie and Andy of Safeguard Privacy. Many of you know, some of you use them. If you don't, you probably should be. But I was talking to Richie and just chatting and all that, and he told me he was sending out an alert to many of their customers about some new features that people need now, January 1, because of the obligations that are kicking in, particularly around risk assessments. So if you don't know, well, maybe you're screwed. Or if you're not screwed and you scramble and you're ready to start working, maybe now and get yourself in gear, at least you can start putting some of the work down that you're going to need and your senior management is going to be swearing to with legal penalties. So if you didn't catch that, this is not just some assessment you're doing, you're putting in the drawer, and if there's ever a problem, you can show you did the right work. This is serious business. Richie, what is happening January 1 in California and why is it important?
So, Jules, I'm going to actually focus on the last thing. You know what, Jules, this is like Sarbanes-Oxley. Remember when Sarbanes-Oxley came out? Mm-hmm. That was when every person that was in the management structure of a company had to attest to the financials. And I think, Jules, I may get it wrong, I think that was in response to Enron and some other stuff, and some fraud stuff was happening. But I remember being an executive at News Corp running a business under the CEO and having to sign a piece of paper and saying, what's going on? And everybody had to sign. And that was a seismic shift in business. And I think what's happened is we've got a lot of changes. Connecticut had some reg changes, Colorado, Texas, everybody's got changes. I think this sneaked through. And I think California wrote a new reg that, and Andy will take us through the details, where you have to have kind of like a super DPIA about all your processing. But the kicker here is you have to file this report. Senior management has to attest with criminal issues, and the AG and the California enforcers can come to you at any time between now and April of 2028 and ask you on demand to show your reports. And I think this attestation, Jules, changes the game materially for privacy professionals and for executives in companies. And I think it takes it to a new level, the way Sarbanes-Oxley took financial reporting to a new level in companies. Does that make sense, Jules?
It makes sense. And let me just also flag that we have our encyclopedia of state legislation and master of all nuances regulation, Jordan Francis, with us, and he will share some thoughts, not just about California, but some of the other states that are also kicking in. Okay, so Andy, Richie, as you can tell, is the scrappy startup CEO making things happen. Andy is the legal mind. Walk us a little bit through. We know how to do risk assessments in privacy land, but there's some real detail here about exactly what the California risk assessment looks like, which is kind of good because people usually spend a lot of time, what kind of assessment, what do I do, which should do it, ISO, this, NIST, right? There's a lot of detail here, but the downside is you got to actually do what the law spells out. Give us a little bit of an understanding of what these assessments look like and what the legal obligations actually are.
Sure. Thanks, Jules, and happy holidays to everyone. I think just to start, what we're talking about are the new California regs that cover cybersecurity, automated decision-making technology, and risk assessment. So that's our focus for today. So the high level is there are three main requirements under the risk assessment regs in California. One is the risk assessment itself. Second is a risk assessment report, which is a defined term in the new reg. And then the third thing is a annual submission starting in 2028 to the California Privacy Protection Agency, affectionately known as CalPrivacy. So, what you might say, well, what's the difference between a risk assessment and a risk assessment report? and really, the first thing is the risk assessments are internal only, and they don't have to be submitted to anyone anytime. Those are internal risk assessments that you maintain for your own business. However, there is this risk assessment report that has to be produced, within 30 days of a demand from CalPrivacy or the California agency, and it has to document all of the requirements in your risk assessment except for two. It's kind of interesting what those two are. They're the two things that don't have to be documented in your risk assessment report are your assessment of the benefits to the consumer and the public and your organization, and then the negative impacts to consumers from your process. Those two pieces don't have to be documented in your risk assessment report, which is kind of interesting because that's the primary purpose of the risk assessment, is the way that kind of like a GDPR legitimate interest test is what that's about. So you do have to document what you're going to do about any negative impact and how you're going to mitigate risk and that sort of thing. And so it's an interesting question for lawyers: is why did they say that the risks and benefits to consumers don't have to be documented? And we could all kind of come up with theories on that. But and then so we have the risk assessment itself, the risk assessment report, and then the third thing is an annual submission to the CalPrivacy to their website, which is the thing that starts in 2028. That's the piece that has to be attested to by a knowledgeable member of the executive management, and you have to attest to it under penalty of perjury. So, in theory, it potentially carries criminal penalties if you don't do it the right way. Those are another important piece, and I'll stop after this. We'll see if we have questions or dig into any of this. The risk assessment report is not what you file with CalPrivacy on an annual basis. The submissions to CalPrivacy have a separate set of requirements, and they're really about this attestation along with kind of a summary of how many risk assessments did you do in the prior year, what categories do they fall in, like sales share or personal information, that kind of thing. So those are, we've seen some confusion in the market about, do I have to file my risk assessment report with CalPrivacy? Answer to that is no. You might have to give it to, under a demand, either it's AG or CalPrivacy. Don't file that on an annual basis. The key thing is, to me, people need to understand about timing stuff, is that since the AG or CalPrivacy can demand to see the risk assessment reports after January 1, 2026, it's pretty important to start working on those for these areas where risk assessments are required. So let me pause there and see, what further things.
So what you guys have done to try to make this easy for people who just learned about this now, or who frankly just want to know they're not making it up on their own, or they don't want to send it out to outside counsel and they want a template, right? So you guys have in your platform sort of built out a template that people can just start like walking through and completing per projects that are ongoing or the like. Is that right?
So
That's
Jules, sorry, Andy. So, Jules, think about our platform as more holistic, right? You're a major brand and you're touching 500 vendors, you're touching 1,000 vendors, 2,000 vendors. Safeguard Privacy and the IAB Diligence platform, same thing. You are doing your due diligence on your vendors with our multi-state, with all the state laws. So you're covering all 20 state laws. You're using the IAB modules with the right data flows if your vendor's a DSP, or your vendor's an SSP, or your vendor's a data provider or a publisher. Now, in the same platform, and remember, Article 10, which is what we're talking about, it requires you to conduct a risk assessment before beginning processing activities that are significant risk to consumers. That's defined as selling or sharing personal information, that's digital advertising, processing sensitive, personal information, or using automated decision technologies. All those are literally throughout the entire digital ecosystem. So what our legal team that Andy leads and our team of experts has done is created a very clear, with instructions, template that for each of those processing activities, you can fill it out, you can file it, so that, gosh forbid, the AG comes to you like, I've done the assessments on the state laws, I've done all my vendor assessments, I've done my data flows, and here's my report for the the CPPA saying, here was my processing of activities because I got demanded it. Or on April 1st of 2028, right, Andy? I submit my report and I say, I did 20 on advertising. I did 10 on sensitive data. I did 30 on automated decision making. And we're trying to make it part of your day-to-day process, because when you're doing these assessments and you're doing the vendor stuff, it's so easy to say, here's what I'm doing with the processing, instead of going back in 6 months and trying to say, what did I do 6 months ago?
Let me ask a really annoying question, though.
Yeah.
For risk assessment covered activities, initiated on or after January 1, what does it mean to initiate a processing activity, right? So leaving aside there are new things, big new things, but there's little things. I mean, I change a field in Salesforce. What amounts do we have any guidance? And I don't know, maybe Jordan or Andy know this. Do we have any? Well, maybe you know, Andy, Richie, you might know too. But do we have any guidance on what it means to initiate a processing activity? I mean, it sounds like if the system has been doing and I don't touch it and it's continuing to work, then that obligation doesn't kick in until later. But a new thing. So how new is new? Like,
yeah, I can take that. I mean, so it says there's a section in the new regs that says, well, first of all, you highlighted a thing, which is when you're talking about stuff you're doing today and you're going to continue it after January 1, 2026, your obligation to create a risk assessment for those activities is 2027. That's when you have to have it done. But there's also this piece that says if you make a material change, you have to update the risk assessment. And I think that's where this. So I would say the way I would answer it simply is, if you're doing something wholly new after January 1, 2026, you have to do a risk assessment before initiating the process. That's the first thing. And then the question is, what about this stuff that you're already doing? And what I would say there is, if you're going to make a material change to your processing after January 1, 2026, you also have to do the risk assessment before getting the processing like that. And they even go on to define what is material. And they say that the words are, if it creates new negative impact or increases the magnitude or likelihood of previously identified negative impacts, or diminishes the effectiveness of safeguards. They go on, but so there's a long definition about what a material change is. And my reading is, if you do a material change, you need to do your risk assessment before you start
So
applying.
hopefully this should sync with what companies, again, who have a mature process and who today do privacy assessments and so forth for a range of activities, in theory, obligate themselves to do a new assessment.
But Andy was clear, if you do something that started before January 1st and it continues, you still have to go back and do one, right, Andy? You just have till the end of 2027 to do it, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
And now,
Unless there's a material change, and then I would
then
say
it's a new one, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, Jules, think about this from a business side, right? There is so much change right now happening with AI in data flows, with AI in audience capture, with getting your audience segments, with all the things that touch your data where you're sharing or selling it. I think you have to be careful, right, Andy? I mean, you're going to trigger a significant change. These regulators are digging into the AI usage, and they're digging into the changes in how DSPs are delivering ads, how they're sharing the data, clean rooms, all of this. I'm concerned that people are going to trip this wire, right, Andy? I mean, it's a business decision here, but these are real changes to how the data is being processed.
One quick thought, and I want to bring in Jordan. A lot of AGs or agencies proactively asking for this sort of thing has not been historically what they do. If there's an investigation or enforcement, but generally sweeping. California is hiring, and I think will quite soon announce their chief privacy auditor. So there's staff and a team, and I've talked to some of the people they've talked to, and they're qualified people, some with deep industry experience who, for better or worse, understand what happens internally. They've actually been quite smart about hiring a number of people from the private sector who actually know stuff. And so there is a team who's going to have time, energy, and a focus on auditing, and that's a novel role. Jordan, your thoughts on this, and then let's touch quickly on. It's not just California. California is the big player here with these changes, but there's some other requirements kicking in a few other states.
Yeah, thanks, Jules. I think that theoretically, you would hope that there's going to be a little bit of grace as this goes into effect. Obviously, January 1, 2026, that's an immediate pressing deadline. You would expect strict compliance around not initiating a processing activity before conducting this risk assessment. I think that's a very significant change compared to what we've seen under similar requirements under other laws. But for existing requirements, the need to conduct a risk assessment by the end of 2027, that's a pretty long window there. So you would hope that there's a little bit of flexibility and understanding. And I do think that there are a lot of significant unresolved questions going into this. We talked a little bit about, what does it mean to initiate one of these activities? I think that is a pretty gray question. And I went and I looked at the final statement of reasons for these regulations. There are only 3 mentions to initiating in there, and none of them clarify what it means to initiate a processing activity, how much of the pre-work actually activates those obligations. So I do think that there are some pretty significant questions around that. And in general, I just wanted to have a chance to say, I really like, Andy and Richie, how you've laid out the requirements under this. Andy used the term market confusion as to who has to do what and when. And I think it's a really great term for what's going on here. If I could take a blue pen to the regulations and make a non-substantive change, I think I would much more clearly lay out at the start of the risk assessment requirements that you have these 3 buckets of different things: the risk assessment report, and the risk assessment information. And those are things that, if you followed these regulations, changed really significantly. This was a 2-year regulatory process. Actually, one of my first projects joining FPF over 2 years ago was doing comparative analysis on these risk assessment requirements. And in those 2 years, it's evolved so much, from submitting abridged risk assessments to risk assessment information. So I really like that you two have sort of more clearly defined the actual obligations under here. And I think going into reading the regulations and actually trying to implement risk assessments, keeping those 3 different activities in mind: risk assessment report, risk assessment information, so important and so helpful for people who are actually doing this.
What's happening in some of the other states that kick in January as well?
Yes, so I'll always refer folks. We have a great effective dates chart on the FPF website. Someone should be posting that in the comments. Lots of January 1st deadlines as usual. We have a couple new comprehensive privacy laws going into effect in Indiana, Kentucky, and Rhode Island. There are also some pretty significant amendments to existing laws that are going into effect. The one I'll flag for folks is in Oregon. They passed an amendment this year. So under the Oregon Consumer Privacy Act, you will not be able to sell precise geolocation data or the personal data of minors under 16. That goes into effect January 1st. So pretty significant change there. There's also a new age-appropriate design code going into effect in Nebraska. And controllers under many of the existing privacy laws are going to have to start complying with opt-out preference signals more going forward. I think Delaware and a couple other states, those requirements go into effect right away on January 1st. And Jules, I know of special interest to you, the Texas App Store Accountability Act going into effect January 1st.
Yeah, I will tell you, like many of you, I was following this as, companies are debating, Apple and Google were not eager to have the App Store sort of take on the age verification responsibility for all apps, worrying that, well, are we just giving all these apps age information? Do they need it? What are they going to do with it? But Meta, others were supportive of this direction, and everyone else was sort of on the sidelines, I'd say. And well, January 1, every new app, if you got a mobile app, a new customer downloads the app stores are going to give you the age range. They're going to tell you this is a user under 13 or a young teen or an older teen. And if you're a kid's app, you probably are in this world already and have figured out how to deal with parental consent or made sure your app doesn't collect any kind of information that would create an issue under COPPA. But if you're the weather app, you're maybe the New York Times, you're, well, every other app in the world, sports and so forth, you're going to be told these users are kids. January 1. What you gonna do? Are you ready to block those users because you're not ready? You're not in a position. Are you going to try to create a parental consent process? Now, there is a consent process that the app stores need to follow to get the parent to approve the kid to download the app. But that's just the App Store process, right? You already can sign up today, to have the Apple App Store and put your kid, in an account that the parent controls. That doesn't, and the parent saying, yeah, you can download the app. That doesn't give the app verified parental consent as COPPA requires. So are you going to be able to rely on the App Store process? It's not fully clear exactly how the app stores are going to implement this, but I'd be surprised if they feel that they're now going to put themselves on the hook, because you got to tell the parent exactly what the app does. I don't know what you do. I can't be the one saying, here's exactly what this app does, right? You need to do that if you're the app developer. So are you ready to block? Lots of companies we talk to are like, look, and some of them are companies that, maybe there's a health insurance plan, maybe it's a medical device. Like they know there are some kids, but they're not structured, and they're going to either block or they're going to try to come up with a parental control process. Some of you are going to learn that you've got young teens. Now, Texas does not have other requirements that kick in. Other states, if you learn that you're dealing with a young teen, do actually have requirements. So a few other states have versions of this. Utah, Jordan probably has on his fingers the others. California, down the line, Brazil, there are a couple of other states that have different versions of this similar concept. So don't want to talk more about it. We're gathering lots of our folks and comparing notes and trying to understand, what it takes to move towards implementation. But if this hasn't been on your radar screen, take note. This is what is kicking in. All right, we're going to go to our holiday party. If you guys want Safeguard's great handbook on privacy compliance generally, I think we're posting it in the notes. If you're interested in the templates and the other stuff in the platform, go talk to them. And the last piece is, we got to at least mention the big news of the day, the White House executive order, which came out last night. Lots of folks obviously have been following this. It's been on, it's been off, it's been on, it's been off. It's now out. Lots of detail about how the administration is going to push against state laws by seeking to limit funding, having the FTC involved, a whole range of other activities. The notable one is there is a discussion of advancing national AI legislation, very limited, intending to be preemptive without creating significant new obligations. Complicated path forward to that. Republicans and Democrats disagree. So no immediate action, but we actually have a national commitment, at least in the CEO, to advancing a framework for AI legislation. AI legislation, as we even know at the state level, is super complicated, right? You're regulating a bunch of stuff that is sometimes already regulated. It's banking, it's finance, it's a lot of sectors. Doing it at a national level, super complicated. There is a political commitment to not preempting some of the important recent kids-related laws as well as others. So the debate is on. Follow it closely, and let's see how it plays out. Richie, Andy,
Jules, thanks for having us on, especially on the day of your holiday party. We very much appreciate you and Jordan taking the time out. We really appreciate everything the FPF does.
Thank you.
Your entire team are, really leading the way and helping everybody understand what's happening out there. We're big fans of everything the FPF is doing, and we appreciate you taking the time to do this LinkedIn Live when you're missing your amazing white elephant holiday party.
We're going there right now. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Best wishes for
Happy holidays.
Join us every Friday noon. We'll take a break probably during the holidays, but join me every Friday noon Eastern. And if you want to come on and you have smart things to say, give me a ping and maybe we'll make it happen. Jordan, thanks for joining us. Have a good weekend all. Happy Friday.
Thanks,
Bye, everybody.